Bantu migration. When Bantus came to Africa, they controlled West, Central, East and Southern Africa. They took all the forest to pygmies to avoid the spreading of Islam. Those from the west joined Bantu Gala in the forest to shield against Muslims, and they called themselves Bar-Congolo and DRC. Bantus also called themselves Yahounds. Yahud Aramaic Hebrew, meaning Judah, which is the same capital of Cameroon today, Yahound. Most of the tribes in Zambia and southern Africa can trace their roots from West and East Africa. Most of the tribes kept the Samba, Shabbat, which is still being practiced in Brazil and Cuba. Others have kept the circumcision of males among African tribes, others lost the tradition. Most of them were killed if they kept Shabbat. Bantus were also given a title by the Muslims as the people of the book. This is because the Arabs started trading in slaves 1,000 years before the European slave trade. Hence, informed the Portuguese about the people of the book, a people cursed by God and predestined as slaves. Deuteronomy chapter 28 verses 15 to 68. The Muslims also called the Western Sudan Yahud, which means the lost tribes of Israel. These Hebrews were also led captive into many African nations by many indigenous tribes on the west and east coast of Africa. Some were sold on the basis of losing in a war. Tribesmen would sell Hebrews directly to Europeans and Muslims. The word Congolo, ancient Congolo, is derived from two Hebrew words. In this case, we have kun, meaning established, and yellow, or golo, means exile. Today it is called Congo. 95 to 99 of Bantu or Bantu slaves came from the following places along the Atlantic and Indian Oceans. Zanzibar or Zanzibar in Tanzania is one of the first places where slaves came through, and more accuracy is needed to determine the percentage. 2. Congo Drive in Angola 39.4%. Southeast Africa, Mozambique and Madagascar 4.7%. Nigeria Delta, Cameroon, Equatorial Guinea and Gabon Bantu slaves 14.6%. Senegal and Gambia 4.8%. Guinea-Bissau and Sierra Leone 4.1%. Liberia and Ivory Coast 1.8%. Gold Coast, Ghana and Ivory Coast 10.4%. Here is a brief summary of the origin of the Negroes. Amorite, Hittite, Moabite, Canaanite, Nilotic, Abraham, are also known as Natufian, Bantus. This is what Prophet Ezekiel says once more, and say, that says Master Yahweh to Jerusalem, your birth and your nativity is of the land of Canaan. Your father was an Amorite, and your mother a Hittite. Ezekiel chapter 16 verse 2. These two who have been mentioned in this verse are black African races from which Israel descended, who traveled to east to settle in Canaan before the place was finally given a name, Israel. One of the historian by the name of Hughley wrote about black biblical Hebrews Israelites. He brought out and summarized very important details of this hidden subject. She said, as I quote, many of the Israelites who managed to escape their persecutors during the Roman-Jewish War subsequently migrated to West Africa, and 16,000 years later, their descendants were captured and brought to America in chains by cruel slave traders. She was quoting a Jewish historian, Josephus, from his book The Great Roman-Jewish War, 66 to 70. This historian wrote about the Jewish dispersion and captivity. Generally, Vespasian and his son Caesar Titus fought against the Jews. Millions of Jews fled into Africa, among other places, fleeing from Romans' persecution and starvation during the siege. Dr. Yosef ben Jochanan writes, There are many Hebrews, Jews, tribes that were of indigenous African origin. These African Jews were caught in a rebellion in Cyrene during 115 CE. This rebellion also marked the beginning of a mass Jewish migration southward into Sudan of West Africa. He again said that, in North Africa, just before the period of Christianity's legal entry into Rome due to Constantine the Great conversion in the 4th century, there were many Hebrews, Jews, tribes that are indigenous African Jews, the so-called Negroes origin, were caught in a rebellion in Cyrene against the Roman imperialism and colonialism. Now the question which we should ask is that, if the original Jews were black, where did the white Jews come from? This is more proof that many Hebrews are in Africa and some crossed the Atlantic and Indian Oceans as slaves. For this reason every African American has some Israelite ancestry in their family tree, whether he or she knows it or not. 2 years ago, some black Americans were trying to do some DNA tests to help them trace their roots in Africa. It was discovered to be true, because some were being linked to West Africa, Congo, South Africa and southern Zambia at a place called Ngombeiled, a Tonga word meaning a sleeping cow. This shows that Ngombeiled was also used for slave trade, for both Atlantic and Indian Oceans way. And according to latest discovery of the site, July 2016, the National Heritage Conservation Commission excavated a skeleton believed to have existed between 700 AD and 1100 AD. Here is a statement of facts on Hebrews. There are two main families in Africa, Ham and Shem. Shem and Ham are both Africans by land mass. Shem and Ham are both black-brown, light-dark brown-skinned. Not all blacks are Hebrews, but Bantu and Nilotics are, which means Bantu and Nilotic people are Negroes. The race of Africans corresponds to Hamitic tribes who covered an exclusive plot of land mass given to them by their ancestors. However, since both Shem and Ham have shared this common Africa land mass since the flood, and since Noah, Enoch, and fathering patriarchs have walked and lived on Africa before the flood, before there was an African Ham and Shem, then it is correct to call them Africans in the sense of land mass and not race. To identify people you have to be able to understand the migrations and regions these people came from. What family do the Negroes belong to? Answer is Bantu and Nilotic people. The Nilotic Negroes people are the progenitor of the Bantu Negroes. The Bantu is an admixture of Asiatic fraction. The Bantu and Nilotic people suffered slavery, and the word Bantu is derived from Hebrew word Ethiopia. Therefore, Israelites are a Negro people and not any other race which is not connected to Abraham. The original Arabs were mostly black races, and Egyptien is the real progenitor of Arabs. They are dark-skinned whom rarely show on TV today. The original Arabs were both a Negro Hebrew and African Ethiopians. This means that the descendants of the pharaohs of Egypt are in Africa among different tribes. This means Edom or Esau is a Negro and Ishmael is also a Negro. The sons of Abraham by Keturah whom he sent to the country far east, away from Isaac, are also Negroes.